Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. A little bit of a different video today, a little bit of a different location, still in the studio though. So my channel just hit 5,000 subscribers. Right off the bat, I just want to take a second and say thank you. Thank you so much for all your thoughtful comments, all the time you've invested in me and in yourself to improve your skills with mixing production in Logic Pro. So as a little celebration of 5K subs on this channel, I thought I would just tell you all a little bit about myself, my story in music, my story with Logic Pro. I don't think I've ever actually properly introduced myself here, so here goes. I'm Chris, you know that part. I'm 34 years old and I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia. I've been into music basically my entire life. Ever since I was introduced to the Beatles and Led Zeppelin when I was about 10 years old, I've been truly obsessed with music, and especially obsessed about the creation process of music. Even when I was a little kid, when I was listening to records and discovering new music, I was always thinking about how is this stuff made? How do they do that? And I knew very early on in life that I wanted to do music professionally. So I've played guitar since I was 10, but my main instrument has always been voice. I was in choir all through school, and then I studied classical voice and music technology at Virginia Tech. We were lucky enough to have a professional recording studio on campus as a classroom, and that experience really solidified the idea of being a behind the glass professional for me. While I was in college, I also interned one summer at a big studio on Music Row in Nashville, and that really gave me my first real taste of the music industry. And then after graduation, I moved right out here to LA. And for the next 5 or so years, I was an intern and then eventually an assistant engineer at King Size Sound Labs in Eagle Rock. Then after that, in 2017, I branched out on my own, went full-time freelance and founded Sangstersounds, which I run to this day right here from my home studio. Hey, editing Chris here. So I realized when watching back that I didn't do a very good job of explaining what I do right now with my business Sanster Sounds. So the mission statement of Sanster Sounds is to help independent artists and composers achieve the full potential of their music through a combination of mixing, mastering, production, and education. What that looks like day to day is that I'm either mixing a song for a client, mastering a song for a client, or producing a song for a client, either by having them come here and record at my home studio or through collaboration online. Of course, it also means that I'm creating educational content and videos to share on my social media channels. I also have a mixing course that's available. You can check out the link below for that. I also offer one-on-one coaching calls where I teach students the exact steps they need to elevate their skills with mixing, production, or Logic Pro. So that's what Sangster Sounds is all about. Back to my story. And I've had a home studio, as it were, basically since putting up mattress foam in my closet at my parents' house in high school to make a vocal booth. I actually made my very first recording of my very first band when I was maybe 12 or so by taking a karaoke microphone that had a 1/4-inch jack on the other side and plugged that right into one of those dual tape cassette things, like the stereo equipment piece. That was my first recording. But around the time I went to high school is when I discovered Logic Pro and digital audio workstations in general. I had a Tascam Portastudio first, one of those digital ones, but I could never use it properly and I could never make it sound the way I wanted it to. And then one night I was spending the night at a friend's house, and his parents had a Mac as their family computer. And this was a big deal at this time. I don't know if probably a lot of you remember this or old enough to remember, but back then everyone had one family computer, and it was probably a Dell Tower with Windows 98 on it. That was the standard in every home at that time. But I had this one friend who had a Mac, and on it they had GarageBand. I vividly remember him showing me GarageBand, showing what it could do, and I was just obsessed. I was completely hooked. I went home. I immediately started begging my parents to buy me a Mac, and then I think it was maybe the next Christmas. This must have been 2004 or 5, I got my very first MacBook. It was one of those chunky white ones, like 13-inch ones, if you remember those, and it had GarageBand on it. And I just immediately began to devour it, making tons of terrible, terrible music on it, but having tons of fun. And quickly after that, I discovered that there was the big brother to GarageBand, Logic Pro. So after maybe a few years of messing around with GarageBand, I upgraded to Logic Pro. And at this time, that was Logic Pro version 7. That was the very first one I got. And then I think by the time I went to college, we were on to Logic 8, and then in college, Logic 9. So I've been on it since 7. I've had it all the way through. But I went to college. I'd already started messing around with Logic. I was already getting into production. And then I decided to major in music and be in this music technology program. And luckily enough, strangely enough, the studio at Virginia Tech at the time was built around a Logic Pro system. This was a little odd. Obviously, Pro Tools was the standard, and you would have thought an audio school would be using Pro Tools, but ours used Logic, and I used Logic all the way through college. I did all of my coursework on Logic Pro, and I learned tons about Logic Pro through that experience. But then, as you might guess, when I went to intern in Nashville, I got indoctrinated into the Pro Tools life. That was the industry standard. Obviously, everyone in Nashville uses Pro Tools, and I felt like I really needed to use Pro Tools if I was going to become a professional audio engineer. So the next semester after that internship, I went back to college to start my senior year, and I was just begging my professor to get us a Pro Tools rig so I could get the experience I thought I needed to go on and be a professional audio engineer. So I was totally in the Pro Tools world, and then I moved out here to LA, and of course the studio I worked at here used Pro Tools. So for, I don't know, maybe 7 years, I was day in, day out with Pro Tools. But Logic was not done with me yet. Around 2018 or so, I was producing a record for my friend Ken, and he is a huge Logic Pro guy, and he wanted to be really collaborative with the production, but he had absolutely no interest in learning Pro Tools. So I was like, that's cool. I know how to use Logic. We can do this record in Logic Pro. So I was back on Logic day in and day out for the first time in ages. And through that collaboration, I really fell back in love with using Logic and the possibilities that it offers. So ever since then, I've kind of been reborn as a Logic Pro user, and I've kind of just changed my mind on that concept of Pro Tools as the industry standard, or having to use Pro Tools if you want to be a professional in the audio space, especially because I'm just working for myself and out of my home studio. It doesn't really matter what DAW I use as long as I do the job well, and Logic is the one I know best. I mean, I used Pro Tools for a long time, but I've used Logic since I was like 15 years old, so I just have so many more hours with Logic Pro than any other DAW, and because of that, it's the one that allows me to work fastest and most effectively, and it's the one I just enjoy the most. Then, of course, over the past year or so, making all this content around Logic Pro has just further solidified the fact that Logic Pro is the DAW for me. You know, there's a lot of things I love about Logic Pro. I mean, it's cost effective. It's got an incredible suite of stock plugins. We get meaningful updates to the software regularly. And overall, for me, it just feels like it was designed with music creation in mind above all else. Like, Pro Tools almost feels like it was designed for tracking, mixing, post-production, these like more serious technical things. And for me, Logic just is more joyous to use as a creator of music. It does all the technical stuff super well too, but for me, I just get a lot more joy out of firing up Logic Pro and creating music just off the cuff. It feels like that's what Logic does best. And that's really the truth about DAWs. Like, it just doesn't really matter which one you use. Like, my answer to that old question of which DAW is the best is always the best DAW is the one you know the best, because the one you know the best allows you to get the technical stuff out of the way the quickest so that you can focus on the creative aspect of music making. And that's really the only thing that matters. And for me, that's Logic Pro all day. So I'm the Logic Pro guy. All right, I hope you enjoyed that little inside look at my story with music and with Logic Pro. So this is going to be my last long form video for the year. I want to take a little time off to recharge and to do some planning on some ideas I have for videos next year. But I always want to hear from you all. What types of videos are you interested in seeing on this channel? Are there any specific things that you feel stuck on when trying to make music in Logic Pro? Or what things could I demonstrate that would help take your music to the next level? Please drop a comment below and let me know. I really want to serve you all as best as I possibly can with this channel. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being a member of this community. I'll see you again in 2025.